So this is a bit of a change of pace, and you remember what Todd said yesterday about physicians self-healing and that sort of thing. And I think also not taking ourselves too seriously is a part of that. So what you have at your table is the blurb for the November 28th Nerd Nite. Now you might ask, what is Nerd Nite? Nerd Nite is a performance at the Citadel where scientists present their area of expertise in a sort of humorous, entertaining way. And young people, it's predominantly a young crowd, sits there and drinks and enjoys it. And a lot of prominent people have presented there, including Don Iveson, the new mayor who presented there about a year ago. Nobody from the Faculty of Medicine has presented yet. So lots of people from the university have, but I will be the first person ever to present at Nerd Nite from the Faculty of Medicine. So I thought that I should give this kind of a dry run, and I want to do it with a really tough audience, and boy, you look about as tough as an audience can come. So what's the value of a presentation like this? I think whenever you're faced with a problem, you think, well, what's my armamentarium to deal with this problem? And you can think of a kind of set of things that you can do and bring to bear to solve that problem. And I hope this presentation will convince you that you can extend that a little bit to things you never thought of. You may never have an occasion in your life where you need to consider employing poetry or the idea of polar opposite alter ego or some of the other things I'm going to present here. But on the other hand, you might actually have an occasion where some of these ideas of unexpected strategies to deal with whatever challenges life may present will come up. Well, who am I? So most of you know quite a lot about me, and you've even heard presentations by me, and you probably think this is going to be very much like the ones you already heard. So this is me in the video of the first BAMF conference from 1991. And you know, inside I still feel like I'm that guy, you know? I may not look exactly the same, but I feel like I'm still that person who was running that first BAMF classification meeting in 1991. The classification now includes all solid organs: heart, lung, liver, kidney, small bowel composite tissue graft, which is like hands and faces and stuff. And so it's a really big deal. It's the only game in town worldwide. And you may think I'm going to talk about that, but in a way you're wrong. This is the building where the first meeting was held, and I can remember certain aspects of it like it was yesterday, like who showed up late and who left early and all that kind of thing, and we do have a video. But poetry. So we began incorporating poetry into the meeting as an entertainment part of it. It began innocently enough. Who knew that this would actually turn into anything? But then I got kind of used to running these medical meetings. I was doing it every 2 years. It was going pretty well. And in 2002, I got the idea that if it was so much fun running medical meetings, that why not run gatherings having to do with poetry and art and music. Well, that's, of course, 1,000 times harder because it's much harder to get funding, and it's hard to seek the people who would be interested and so on. But anyway, I decided, I was convinced when in 2002 I was trying to have serious academic meetings in Scotland about the medical meeting I was holding there in 2003. It was the end of January, and the only thing the people wanted to talk about there was Robbie Burns Night. Robbie Burns Night this year, last year, what their brother did, what their cousin did, that was it. they didn't want to talk about my stupid medical meeting. They wanted to talk about Robbie Burns Night as an extension of Scottish culture. And so that year I thought, well, why couldn't we have Leonard Cohen Night as an extension of Canadian culture? Wouldn't that be really cool? So I started doing that, and 3 years later in 2005, I actually spent a 3-day weekend with Leonard Cohen. He gave me a book where he wrote in it, for Kim, great artist of the surreal, thanks for all your help. Now, you may think this idea of the surreal was just kind of an off-the-cuff, random comment on his part, but actually no. You may know that Leonard Cohen, one of the persons that he learned a lot from is the Spanish poet Lorca. And Lorca had a kind of complicated, you know, like on Facebook when they say relationships, it's complicated. Well, his relationship with Salvador Dali was really complicated, but really significant. So Leonard Cohen, therefore, knows a lot about the surreal movement because of that past relationship between Lorca and Dali. There, I bet you didn't know that before, you see? Did you learn anything today? So, also there was a robotic dog at that visit, and the robotic dog mapped Leonard Cohen's kitchen and also asked Leonard Cohen if he'd like to be one of his owners. The robotic dog has 3 special places, 3 owners' voices it can recognize, and so on. And Leonard and I had an interesting discussion about whether it's better for a robotic dog to have 1 owner or whether 2 or 3 would be okay. All right. After that, the Faculty of Medicine offered a course in poetic medicine, and I thought, well, this sounds like a pretty cool thing. So I took this course, and for the first time in my life, I actually wrote a poem on November 20th, 2006. And that becomes important later. Anyway, and something quite interesting happened in 2007. Now, if any of you can conceive of running a big program and having its funding cut, just think about what exactly that means. And I want to tell you something about this. So between 1997 and 2007, I ran something called NKF Cyber Nephrology. It's sort of the forefront of internet medicine in the kidney field, and we had quite adequate funding, $400,000 a year, that sort of thing. In 2007, the National Kidney Foundation told me 2 things, not just one thing, that they couldn't fund me anymore. They didn't have the money, but they wanted the program to continue, and they just hoped I could find the money somewhere else. So lest you think, any of you, that if you're running something, if your funding's cut, that the program ends, they were suggesting to me that the funding was cut and the program didn't end. So what was I going to do about that? Well, we had 3 full-time staff. We had a meeting organizer. We had an IT person, very well-trained IT person, and we had a secretary. So we got rid of all those people and hired students to do the same thing. And it was really rewarding for the students, and these young people became really empowered at a very early age. Think of it, for 10 years, been doing these things. We had all the templates down. We knew exactly what to do. All the people who'd been doing that left. Students come in to do the same thing. So one consequence of that, the 2007 BAMF allograft pathology meeting in La Coruña, Spain, which was a very successful meeting, Tori Sheldon, seen here in the far left, ran that meeting in every way. She was in charge of the finances, of all the scheduling and everything at the age of 19, and she did it flawlessly. And many of you have subsequently met her, and she has then mentored a whole group of other younger students, including Akshatha Raghavir, who's shown here in the next picture. And this has been working very well. We've been empowering young people since 2007 in a very dramatic way, and they end up doing things of a consequence that probably no other young people in the world have been doing. Are there any downsides of that? Well, I don't really think so. And so what I'm about to tell you happened, but it didn't happen because the person involved was young. It just happened, and it could happen to any of you. So Akshatha Raghavir, for this year's meeting, which was in Brazil, and she uniquely was the human being that held all the knowledge. She had done all the negotiations about everybody's travel and the scheduling of where they were staying and when they were speaking and CME credits, the whole deal. So she sent her passport to the Brazilian consulate to get a visa necessary for anybody going to Brazil. She did that by FedEx. The Brazilian consulate put the visa in her passport, sent it back by FedEx. The hospital loading dock received the FedEx package containing the passport with the visa, signed for it with a legible signature of an identifiable person working in that loading dock, and it then disappeared. And the people in the loading dock claimed that they had delivered it to our floor, but they have this manifest where they show where they're delivering, and then there's this little signature space, and there was no signature over there. We knew we had received it, but no amount of threatening, cajoling, being nice, being charming. We tried everything we could, and they said, no, we delivered it. It's out of our hands. We said, we don't have it. Not only that, but the whole meeting is dependent upon this person whose passport you have lost. So anyway, there didn't seem to be a solution. But then, on July 31st, I got to thinking about this, got up 4 in the morning and wrote the following poem. All Akshatha asks for is her passport back. Good morning, dear master of the loading dock. All Akshatha asks for is her passport back. It was delivered here by FedEx 5 days ago. Now where is it? We want to know. Not to have it now is a very low blow for the 250 people all set to go to the meeting in Brazil setting medical standards worldwide, which Akshatha has organized with great pride. She's arranged for doctors all over the world to come together to set medical standards bold. At my meeting now in its 22nd year, so please, loading dock master, put search in high gear. You signed for the passport. Please make it appear. We can all relax finally when you bring it right here. This one FedEx package holds the key to medical progress globally. We're not really sure that's true, but anyway, the important packages come here every day, but Akshatha's FedEx package is especially important to us all. So please check every rack. All Akshatha asks for is her passport back. Now, I don't know how literate this guy working in the loading dock is, but the strange thing about Alberta Health Services now is, many of the ultimate bosses don't work in the same hospital as the people that they supervise. And the ultimate boss of this guy is probably literate. He's probably read an occasional poem. But anyway, I sent this poem to this ultimate boss guy and to this employee, and within an hour and a half, they had found the passport. Not only that, but they said I'd sort of set the bar, that now whenever anyone else has something that is lost, they're going to have to write a poem too. But it kind of empowered me, and it made me think. So this is a picture of Akshatha at the meeting when she finally got there, running things. When she was there, she found out she'd been accepted by the University of Alberta School of Medicine, and so she's now in medical school, so that was kind of a happy thing. But before in my life, I always thought that the audience was limited and that my capacity was sort of marginal, that I didn't know I could write a successful poem. I was usually only writing it for 1 or 2 people. But actually, this experience for me made me feel that I found my voice. I began telling the other 250 people going to the to the meeting. That's probably a Freudian going to the meeting that I had found my voice. Well, they reacted to that by requesting poems. So on the way to Brazil, a lot of us ended up in an intermediate city, Brasilia. So we touched down there, and Lynn Cornell, one of the young nephropathologists going, said, well, we want a layover poem. So this is the layover poem that I wrote. And I wrote it quite quickly. Poetry and the shrunken brain. Jet lag gives the brain a shrink, so one cannot quite normally think. But just like alcohol may lead to cleverness, jet lag could lead to howsomeverness. That could be just the thing a poem needs. The outcome is uncertain because one must also factor in the hungry brain, the thirsty brain, not to mention the tired and unshaven brain, and the wearing yesterday's clothes brain. The aim should be to produce a poem super completely unlike its unkempt author, a poem that becomes increasingly alert and ungreasy with time, thus counterbalancing the progressive dishevelment of the guy writing the poem. The cleaned up, showered poem in fresh clothes and rested is the desirable endpoint here to be tested. Well, since then, I've written a lot of poems. I mean, that's a short period between July 31st and now. And the audience is extremely broad, and I'm proud of this audience. So these are the two ends of the spectrum. That is Aditi Raghavir, who is Akshatha's sister, who's 18. And this is my father, who's 90. And they both are big fans of my poems now. And there are people in all the other decades and situations in life in between the two of them. So it kind of is working for me now. But it's just one of the things. But right about now, you'd be thinking, boy, but this is not relevant to my life. You know, this is not going to help me with the Royal College exams. It's not going to help me with any local politics, but there you'd be wrong. Because if you've been reading your mail, almost all of you received an important Alberta Health Services missive in the space between October 18th and 21st. And it was telling you about a guy you never heard of before, this man on the far right, David Diamond. And it was telling you that if member of parliament or some important person calls your hospital to try to influence clinical care, all such calls should now be referred to the Office of External Relations of Alberta Health Services, and this is the director of that office. But what is this guy's qualifications? He is in theater and poetry, and he runs workshops where one uses theater and poetry to kind of get insights into problems, like, for instance, professionalism. And I went to work. This is a picture that I took at a medical professionalism workshop, but what we did is to create plays and to write poetry. So, lest you think that your ultimate employer has no interest in what Dr. Solez is talking about today, I'm telling you they've recently made a strategic decision that all uncomfortable phone calls to the hospital from powerful people trying to inappropriately influence clinical care should go to this guy. And you would recognize he has nothing to lose. He is successful in theater and poetry, and he could care less whatever threats he receives from these powerful people. And I also want you to know I had nothing to do with that decision. I was very surprised and pleased by it. Now, as many of you know, I run a course about technology and the future of medicine. Some of you may have the bias that what's shown here on the left, which is the technological singularity, is the only thing taught in that course. And we just teach it over and over and over again, and nobody believes it, and so the whole course is wrecked. But that's actually not true. We teach you things the exact opposite of that too, like karma. Did you know that karma goes back 7 generations and forward 7 generations? So inappropriate behavior that you exhibit today could create misfortune for your descendants 7 generations forward. And things that happen bad to you today could be because of things like that. In past generations, we also talk about things like navigating by the stars, celestial navigation. And that's become really important because with computers, a lot of people who are piloting ships stopped learning how to navigate by the stars. Then in the 1990s, there were a number of big ships that were dead in the water, as they say, because their navigation computer went out and the people in charge did. So we have a balanced course. And no matter what your own views are about the value of technology or of karma or of celestial navigation, find it all in that course. But in the course, we are also interested in this idea of computers becoming smarter than we are. How does that play out in all aspects of human endeavor? And I'm interested in that in music. And it's quite interesting. As you probably know, there have been software programs that can write music for a long time, but they don't write music that's as good as the best human composers. But probably many of you have fantasized about being a music guru. That is somebody who can detect which musical artists are going to become famous, are going to become really hot, are going to sell a lot of records. And computers are now about as good or better than human beings are at that. Nora Jones, who you will recognize down here at the lower right, it was identified she was going to be a major superstar by this music X-ray software well before it ever happened. And they're now quite confident of being able to do that. So anyway, I've been interested in this idea of the future of music. There was about 4 years ago an idea that music was dying. There were no genres. Terrible things were happening to music. I sort of sensed that could not possibly be true. That's some sort of bias. But anyway, I thought, well, how can I stay in tune with what's going on in music? And I thought, well, wouldn't the new music gradually naturally gravitate toward young people? And wouldn't mainstream radio stations for young people be an expression of that? So I started listening to Hot 107. Now, I can already tell no one in this room listens to Hot 107. It's not that all young people listen to it. These are like the people that you went to high school with but lost touch because they were losers. Or those are the people who regularly listen to Hot 107. And the unfortunate thing, of course, is there are a lot more of those regular, normal people than us highly cool people. And so the listenership amongst young people, late teens to mid-20s, listening to Hot 107 is very high. So I thought, although I listen to cool stations at home, I listen to CKUA and CBC, but in the car, why don't I make myself listen to Hot 107? And I've been doing that now for 4 years. So I feel I always wanted to be a spy or a secret agent, and I really am that now. I've reached this life goal because regularly on Hot 107, they make jokes about older people. What's the funniest thing you ever saw an old guy do? And jokes about physicians. It's clear that they are convinced there are no older people and no physicians listening. And every Friday, they name the station after somebody who has liked them on Facebook. Now, I've liked them on Facebook. And so Michael Mengel and I have a plan for the most gigantic celebration you can imagine On the Friday, when they name the station after me for that day and they find out what my demographic characteristics are, we're going to have the most fantastic party you can possibly imagine. They have a very good iPad app. One of the things that attracted me is, although it's just an ordinary Edmonton radio station, anywhere in the world you can see where they're playing right now. And now, in transplant pathology, which is my area, we hold these BAMF meetings every 2 years, and they're quite successful in the narrow confines that they are operating in. But you know, think about it. Transplant pathology, that's the pathology of transplantation. With stem cells, you can imagine that some years from now, we won't be transplanting anything. Transplantation will end. So what I've noticed is that I need to stimulate people to think about that a bit, because otherwise we're creating more and more structures around transplant pathology. We have now a Swiss foundation, which is new in 2013. Up until now, it's just been Dr. Lorraine Rackison and I that are sort of managing this like a family enterprise with our benign guiding hand, but no structure whatsoever. So now we have structure. Wonderful. So we know that I can only serve as a leader for the next 6 years, then presumably it'll be Michael Mengel, and we don't know who really after that. But what is all that for if we don't pay attention to the rest of life going on around us? If transplantation is ending, we need to reinvent ourselves, just like all of you eventually do, probably. It's said that in modern life, young people today will have 5 jobs. The last 3 of those, the names for those jobs don't even exist yet. So you'll be doing something so unfamiliar in 2013 that there is no name for it. So what I've been trying to promote, so that this idea, it's an old idea, goes back to sometime in the 1300s or before, of turtles all the way down. The universe as the world sitting on a turtle, and then the wise men asked, well, what's the turtle sitting on? And it's turtles all the way down. And so whatever your focus, whatever your kind of worldview is, whatever you see as the life around you, that actually everything's changing. So if we in transplant pathology think that transplantation is static, and pathology is static, and medicine is static, and society is static, the basic character of human beings is static, and North America is static, and so on and so forth, the world, the universe, we're wrong. Because everything's changing, and you have to factor in the things going on around you. You can't just get together every 2 years and plan, okay, folks, so these are the problems in transplant pathology, what are we going to... You have to be thinking a bit beyond that. Now, I don't know how appealing this idea of turtles all the way down is, but in most groups, after a while, you get sort of bored with this, you lose eye contact, and it's just not working. We need something better than that. So the other way I've been stimulating people to think about how different the future could be than the past is by considering a human being, another physician, who is about as different from me as you can possibly get. And to think that the future may be as different from the present as David Crippen is from Kim Solez. Now, why would one even compare the two? In 1994, I began the internet resources in kidney medicine. So the websites, the email discussion groups, and so on. And I've continued to sort of lead that. And David Crippen did the same thing in critical care medicine. So in that way, we are similar. But in every other way, we are different. So let's talk about awards. So he's won lots of military awards, awards for bravery and this, that, and the other thing. I haven't even served in military. I have no military awards. I have a lot of civilian awards. He has no civilian awards. You'll notice here in these two pictures, he appears to be standing up and I'm sitting down. Well, he spends most of his work life standing up. I spend most of my work life sitting down. How did he end up serving in the military? Well, he was a really interesting young person. I was a really boring young person. I just got good grades, but otherwise nothing particularly remarkable about me. He flunked out of one college. He was expelled from another for disciplinary reasons. His girlfriend looked him in the eye, told him he was a loser. She was leaving. He got drafted. He served in Vietnam. He came back, and he was sort of interested in medical things. He was probably destined to be a lab medicine PhD. He was working in a lab, and he thought that he'd still apply to medical school, even though his grades were bad and his references were bad. But, you know, why not try? So at the University of Georgia, he had an interview with a powerful faculty member who thought he had promise somehow. What's the worst that could happen if once in the history of the school we sort of dipped down and took somebody who doesn't fit in terms of grades and, you know, recommendations, and just see what happens if we put them in medical school? So that's what they did. They accepted him. And so in the 60s and the 70s, everything that you might find interesting as you now think about the 60s and 70s, he was in the midst of. And there is this book that he's written many books about his life and his rock band, which is a very successful rock band, and his motorcycles. I hate to tell you this, I don't have a rock band. I've never ridden a motorcycle, see? But anyway, in this book, The Confessions of an Attentive Observer, the 60s and the 70s, you'll find, for instance, that he was Timothy Leary's personal physician for the last 3 years of his life. You may know that Timothy Leary was the big LSD guy. And so now what has happened is that we are able to compare some other things quite specifically. Let's talk about trips to Nepal. As many of you know, I've helped to start a new medical school there. David Crippen went to Nepal in 1983. He did adventure tourism there in the high Himalayas. It's not legal to take out religious icons, but he took this Mani stone out in his dirty underwear. And this is me in Nepal with a visit to a village that has no medical care. We're trying to fix that problem and the fact that a large amount of the country has absolutely no medical care, and that's the consultative meeting. And now you'll recognize that turtle up there as an example of turtles all the way down. So what about this concept of the alter ego opposite? Is it doing anything? Is it working? Is that a testable hypothesis? Well, I think it is actually testable if you think about it. Now, at the meeting in Brazil, I did a lot of talking about David Crippen. Nobody there had ever met him. And there are a lot of other contrasts between us. I didn't go through them all, but they're all quite, dramatic. It's not a minor thing. It's like all or nothing. We're absolutely different. And a lot of the people at the meeting became convinced that David Crippen does not exist. And I think that when a metaphor becomes mythology, then you've really accomplished something. You've done something in people's minds that they'll probably find memorable. Now, believe it or not, an upcoming BAMF meeting is planned for Pittsburgh. He will almost certainly be able to go, since that's where he works, at the University of Pittsburgh. So finally, this will be brought full circle, and the people in transplant pathology will be able to meet this guy, who they believe is probably only a myth. So I brought along this book about his activities in the 60s and 70s. There are many shocking pictures in there. I assure you I have no comparable shocking pictures. If I were to write about my activities in the 60s and 70s, you'd find it completely boring. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of my presentation, and dry run practice for Nerd Nite on November 28th at the Citadel Theater. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, I think that was a fantastic talk. Actually, I'm going to bring my son to Nerd Nite, and my wife is totally not surprised at all that we're going to Nerd Nite.